What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. I've seen the comments. They continue to come in. Andy, you're missing out on this player. Why aren't you talking about this player as much? This player is being slept on, right? Those comments keep coming in. I did a video on this a few days ago. It seemed to go down pretty well. So I thought we'd talk about a bunch more players that are apparently being overlooked. I'm going to talk about them. Some of them I may have slightly changed my mind on, but ultimately I'm going to give you my opinion on whether I think they're good picks or not for our Game Week 1 squad. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here, and let's jump into it. Okay, let's finally talk about Matty Cash. I feel like in the comment section throughout pre-season, he is the #1 name that I've seen that apparently I'm overlooking. So we're going to discuss him. £5 million. He seems to be quite popular already. 20.6% ownership. I think we have to remember with ownership levels, there probably are still some auto-pick teams. And also, at the time of recording, there's about 4 million FPL managers. By the time we get to the deadline, that will probably be closer to 7, maybe 8 million. There's still a lot of people to join up. These ownership numbers are going to change quite a bit. Now, I've talked about Aston Villa fixtures a lot, especially from an attacking point of view, like Leon Bailey, for example, Coutinho as well. I think they're slightly better from a defensive point of view because that Crystal Palace fixture, last year they were much better in defence than they necessarily were in attack. Obviously, they got good attackers like Zaha, Elise, Eze, etc. But in terms of the numbers, it wasn't quite up there. So I think the first 3 fixtures for Villa are okay. Like Everton as well, weren't great in attack last year. They've also lost Richarlison, which isn't great. I know they've made some new signings like McNeil, but I don't know if they're going to come in and have the same impact that Richarlison had on that team, right? And then Bournemouth away, it's tricky to know how a newly promoted side will come up and play straight away. I think you have to see them as an easy fixture until you know more. So the first 3 are okay, but after that it gets pretty bad. So on screen you got West Ham, Arsenal, Man City. They are 3 teams you could definitely see scoring against Villa. And I think it's worth remembering, right? Because a lot of people bring this up about who's going to win the game. That does not matter from an FPL point of view. Not really anyway. Obviously, if a team goes ahead 1-0 early on, they might sit back and defend, and that might change the outcome of the game. But ultimately, we do not care whether Villa are going to win or lose these games. It's just about whether they're going to concede when you own one of their attackers. And West Ham, Arsenal, and Man City, all very capable of scoring. And then if you look further on, like Leicester isn't that much easier. Again, they didn't do well last season at all, but their attack was still pretty good. And even Southampton and Leeds, right? Again, they are fixtures Villa could win, but they are both teams that could score. Slightly easier than the rest we just talked about, but still not ideal. So I just feel like it's very short-term thinking to have an Aston Villa defender. Now, one thing I will kind of counter that with, my own point, is your own team. Like, you need to decide when you're going to make transfers. So you could say, I really like Matty Cash. I want to give him at least the first 3 game weeks, and then maybe I'll look to transfer him out. That could be a plan. But for some of you, you'll have a different transfer in mind for game week 3. So you're going to have to look at your own squad and work out when you're going to be able to use transfers, or maybe when you're going to be able to rotate someone from your bench in instead. So that is worth looking at as well. In terms of the prospects, he's fairly attacking. I think when you compare him to Luca Dean, I think most people expect Cash to be in the box, maybe getting a goal versus Luca Dean. But the numbers are interesting. So expected goals per 90 for Cash is 0.07, which isn't too bad for a defender. Luca Dean's only slightly behind at 0.04, but expected assists are much higher for Luca Dean. So Cash is 0.05, as you can see on the screen, and Luca Dean is 0.14, and he's kept that up over a lot of seasons, right? He is a fairly attacking defender, Luca Dean. So I actually think Luca Dean is the one that's being overlooked, not Matty Cash. But ultimately, I think there's better 5 million defenders. I think there's a better 5 million defender in this list as well, who just has a better long-term fixtures as well. So I like Cash. I kind of rate Villa defence fairly decently as well. They've obviously got Diogo Carlos in there as well. I think Mings has also been dropped from captaincy, so I don't think he's going to play. That might improve Villa defence as well. So I think there's good prospects there, good potential. I don't know about just targeting 3 fixtures and then not really wanting the player after that. And I don't know if his attacking potential really warrants him having him in for West Ham, Arsenal, Man City. So I'm not really that high up on Matty Cash, if I'm honest. Who knows? He might still make my team. But I do think Luca Dean is the one that's being slept on, and he's hardly being talked about. He could actually be the better option. So I would agree, for someone that scored over 200 points last season, Jarrod Bowen probably hasn't been talked about enough, at least on this channel, right? I've mentioned him, but I've not given him a proper discussion. So we're going to do that now. He is 8.5 million. So that 0.5 million difference between him and obviously the likes of Saka, Mason Mount, Luis Diaz, it does make a difference, right? He's got to be able to justify spending that extra money on him. And I do think at some point throughout this season, I will probably go for him. I just don't think it's going to be for game week 1. So some of the pros to going for him, his underlying numbers are really good. One thing that he really improved on last season versus previous seasons was expected goals per 90 minutes. So he's up at 0.34. His overall expected goal involvement's over 0.5. That's pretty decent, right? There's obviously question marks over whether he can keep that up. He had a really good season last year. Will he be able to repeat that? I'd always be a little bit skeptical. Obviously players like Salah, for example, Kane and Son, they've done it over multiple seasons. I don't think it's that bad to be a little bit skeptical about whether Bowen can do it again. But he is a really good player. And I think one thing I really like for West Ham is even though they've signed a new forward, who I think is Scamacca, I've probably pronounced that wrong, he might rotate with Antonio. Antonio might move to a slightly different position. Whatever happens, Jarrod Bowen's going to play. He played a lot of minutes last year, even when European matches were on as well, when he was fit. So I think in terms of being on the pitch, not getting subbed off that often, getting decent minutes with decent underlying numbers, it's all there. He did slightly overperform his expected assists. So in total last season, he got 5.7 expected assists. He got 12 real assists, according to Transfer Market. But on the FPL page, he got 17. So there was a lot of fantasy assists in there, which are not necessarily as easy to repeat. So his assist numbers might come down a little bit this season, which will obviously affect his total points. And then you look at the fixtures, right? And I know people will say he got something against Man City last year, but you have to ask yourself whether that's repeatable. Just because he got something against Man City doesn't mean he's going to do it again. And ultimately, that is the toughest match you're going to play all season, right? Man City is the best defence. So in my eyes, it's more likely he gets nothing in that game. And then it's relying on kind of Forest, Brighton and Aston Villa, which are okay fixtures. I think with Brighton and Villa, they're not necessarily pushovers. They're not necessarily fixtures that you would go out and target. But when they're in a combination of fixtures, you're probably okay with playing Bowen in those. So again, it comes down to how quickly do you want to use a transfer on him, right? Do you want him for those first 4 and then maybe look to get rid before Spurs and Chelsea? You could do that. But I think the likes of Mount and Saka and Luis Diaz just have overall better fixtures in the first 6, and you save that 0.5 million. I think it is hard to justify going for Bowen from game week 1. Again, later on in the season, quite possibly he comes into our teams. I'm just not sure about right now. I do think West Ham are a team that play pretty well on the counter-attack. So in games like Man City, Chelsea and Spurs, where those teams are probably going to have more of the ball, West Ham will do well. But again, how many goals are really going to be up for grabs in those games? I'm just not sure there's a huge amount. So I really like Bowen. Like I said, a little bit sceptical about whether he can repeat that, but I think he will have another good season overall and will probably justify an 8.5 million price tag. But for me, it's just not one for game week 1. I just prefer a lot of the other £8 million midfielders, and obviously then you save the money too. So in the last video I did like this, I spoke about the Man United attack. In this one, we're going to talk about the Man United defence. I think specifically people are looking at Diogo Dalot. He is the Man United defender I would buy right now if I was looking to get one. I wouldn't spend 5 million on a defender. I think Luke Shaw will probably start first choice left back. But I think Malacia might provide a little bit of competition, right? He's a new signing under Ten Hag. Whereas on the right-hand side, Wan-Bissaka I just don't think is ever going to be good enough on the ball for a Ten Hag side. And I think Man United will ultimately look to get rid of him. So Dalot's got a little bit less competition, although I should say at the time of recording, which is on Friday, it's not going to go out until Sunday, Man United are apparently trying to buy a new right back. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Given how Man United's transfer business has gone so far this summer, I don't necessarily think they'll be in for game week 1. So Dalot should be okay. I wouldn't go for Martinez instead. I don't think there's enough attacking threat there. So obviously you can get a 4.5 million defender in a top 6 side, even though Man United didn't really defend like a top 6 side last year. They weren't fantastic, and I do have slight worries over how they're going to do early season. I think Ten Hag overall has got a lot of work to do. Man United were poor last year, but I think in terms of attack, okay, they didn't do well last season, maybe even not the season before for those of them that were at the club, but the likes of Sancho and Fernandes and Rashford and Martial, these are players that have had double digits goals and assists in previous seasons before. They've done it, and I think they will learn under Ten Hag, and I think they might do pretty well early doors. Obviously the whole Ronaldo thing might mess that up, but let's wait and see what happens. In defence, I think there's issues. Luke Shaw didn't play that well last year. I think he is a good left back, and there is quality there, and he'll probably shine through this year. But he didn't do great. So how quickly will he start performing this year? Harry Maguire's under massive pressure, right? The fans are on his back. There's still a good player in there, but how well will he perform in a Ten Hag side when he's maybe got to play a little bit of a higher line? He obviously doesn't have really that much agility or speed or anything like that. Martinez should help with that, of course, if he's going to play on the left and Maguire's on the right. But again, there's a few question marks there. And Diogo Dalot, I know people see him as an attacking defender, even though he got no goals, no assists last year, and his underlying numbers were not that great at all. There's definitely question marks over how good he is as a defender. And then I think Ten Hag's going to want, I've mentioned Ten Hag so many times, he's going to want De Gea playing a little bit more with his feet. And I know there was all those clips on Twitter after the Liverpool pre-season game of De Gea doing that. But ultimately, I don't think he's good enough. And I think under pressure in an actual Premier League game with players pressing, a bit of a higher intensity, I think he's going to struggle. And I think that is going to cause the opposition to have more chances in attack. So those things might all get worked out, and I might be completely wrong, but I think it's okay to be a bit more cautious about the Man United defence versus the attack. If we want to talk about a couple of advantages, Brighton, Brentford and Southampton are maybe not that bad for fixtures. He's also only 4.5 million, so it's not like you're paying a premium. If it goes wrong, at least you spent most of your money elsewhere. And also, Dalot's done well in pre-season, and he is linking up pretty decently with Sancho. And I think he is a player that can get more goals and assists. I know he was poor last year on that regard, but so were Man United. Now they've got a new manager, new way of playing. The emphasis is going to be on attack, and he is going to get forward and involved in the play in the final third. So I think he's perfectly fine as a 4.5 million option. I just think Liverpool, Leicester and Arsenal are all teams that can score, and I just think it's going to be difficult for Ten Hag to get his kind of philosophy and way of playing across straight away, and especially in terms of a defensive point of view. So Dalot's fine because he's 4.5 million, but that's the only reason. If you're not happy about any of the other 4.5 million options, Dalot's perfectly okay, but I wouldn't necessarily expect big things from him. So Newcastle players, that's apparently who I've been overlooking all throughout pre-season. And do you know what? Maybe I have got it wrong. I'm going to talk about why in just a second. For anyone that's like new to the channel, I'm not someone that sits here and thinks my opinion's the only one that matters or that I'm always right. I will get stuff wrong. I'm open to having a conversation. If it's a proper conversation, not someone just laughing at a pick or something like that. So the two main players that came up are Nick Pope and Trippier. They're both 5 million. Obviously, Pope's their new goalkeeper. Trippier's going to play right back, fairly attacking, and on some set pieces as well. Now, fixtures-wise is where I think maybe, not necessarily got it wrong, but maybe overlooked a few things. So Man City and Liverpool are obviously really tricky, right? They're not good fixtures. They're probably not going to get a clean sheet in either of them. And I don't necessarily think that Trippier is so attacking that you'd be happy playing him in those fixtures. With Nick Pope, you could argue that, you know, in the green fixtures, there's lots of potential for clean sheets and maybe save points. And then against City and Liverpool, he is a very good shot stopper. So there could be save points in those games as well. So as an opening keeper in Game Week 1, Nick Pope has probably not had enough recognition. I will say that, you know, one of the things I'm a bit cautious about with Newcastle is just how good they now are. I think they were right down at the bottom before Eddie Howe and the new signings came in. And I think now a lot of people are talking about them as if they're right at the top. I think they're probably a little bit more in the middle, and I'm very cautious about rating them as high as other people are. But Nick Pope is a top quality keeper, and some of those fixtures are really nice. And I think that's where I kind of overlooked that the likes of Brighton and Wolves and Crystal Palace last year, their expected goals per 90 was not that high at all. Now we're hoping for some improvement with Wolves. We talked about Neto a lot during pre-season, and who knows, Crystal Palace have got a lot of talented players, a good manager, maybe they will improve as well. But on paper, Newcastle have 4 out of 6 very good fixtures. And if we look at the fixtures kind of after that, if I just bring up Nick Pope here, you got West Ham away, which isn't too bad, then Bournemouth, then Fulham, then Brentford. Now, I know we're all talking about an early wild card, but if you were to save it until the first international break, which is here between Game Week 8 and 9, that's quite a few fixtures you've got to keep potentially your goalkeeper for. And from Game Week 1 all the way to 8, Newcastle got Forest, Brighton, Wolves, Palace, West Ham and Bournemouth. That's not bad. So Nick Pope could be a genuine option. With Kieran Trippier, I think it is a little bit harder to justify because most of the time when you're spending 5 million on a defender, you're going to want to play them most weeks, and 2 out of the first 5 are not great. But what a lot of people have started talking about, which is interesting, and again, ignore my squad, I'm always playing around with it, is that Andreas Pereira might be an option. So if you're playing 4 or 5 at the back with Trippier in there, you could rotate him out for your bench option, Andreas Pereira, in game week 3, where Fulham played Brentford at home, and game week 5, where they played Brighton at home. Andreas Pereira should be pretty nailed on in a pretty attacking position as well. He could get points for 4.5. I think a lot of people have said that if he'd come into the game at Fulham and wasn't already priced at Man United, he probably would be 5.5 million. So price will play on our minds a little bit, but he could be rotated in for game week 3 and 5, where you dodge the Man City and Liverpool games and just play Trippier elsewhere. So I think when you're comparing, right, for Nick Pope it's tough because you are comparing him to a Chelsea and Arsenal goalkeeper that are playing for better defensive teams, right? Again, Newcastle have improved. I don't think they're up to the level of kind of Chelsea and Arsenal just yet, but with Trippier there's a lot of 5 million defenders I'm just not quite sure about. Like, will I go for Gabriel for Arsenal? Will Ake and Walker get enough minutes? Will Doherty actually be nailed on? Do I want Romero, who's not necessarily super attacking at Spurs? There's not necessarily a huge amount of options unless you want to go for Matty Cash. So I'm coming around to the idea that Newcastle picks might not be too bad. I still don't know if they're going to make my own team, but I do think in terms of fixtures, how good the fixtures outside of Man City and Liverpool were, I did get it a little bit wrong. So maybe overall, Ivan Toney hasn't been talked about a great deal, but I did have him in my best FPL forwards video as the best £7 million forward. So I do rate him as an option. I think Martial is definitely someone you could go for instead if you wanted to back Man United. But obviously Jimenez is out injured now. Mitrovic has got fairly tough fixtures, although he is a little bit cheaper. So there's not a huge amount of forward options in that £7 million and below bracket. Ivan Toney is arguably the best option. Now, fixtures-wise, again, it all comes down to how Leicester and Man United start off the season. I think Leicester's underlying numbers for expected goals conceded last year was really poor. Their defence was awful. They did have a lot of injuries, so context is important. They might be a more difficult side to beat in game week 1. And then Man United, again, as I've already talked about with Dalot, I think there's a lot of work to do. It's how quickly Ten Hag can get that going. And if he doesn't, Ivan Toney could cause problems against both those two defences. And then the fixtures are pretty good for Brentford after that as well. I think in terms of Toney himself, like, his expected goals per 90 are not great. Like, his open play goal threat wasn't brilliant last year, but he is someone that's always going to be on the pitch. He's always going to play 80 to 90 minutes, and he's got penalties as well. So he will tick over with points, as we saw last year. His goals per 90 were 0.37. The switch to 4-3-3, which a lot of Brentford fans have talked about, which should get played in most games, maybe not the more difficult games, that should help him out as well. And I know some people are worried about kind of second season for Brentford, and they might find it a lot tougher, but I think they've made some good signings. They've got reinforcements in attack now with Lewis Potter. They've got Hickey, an attacking fullback. And I know it doesn't necessarily affect Toney, but Ben Mee has also come into that defence as well. So overall, I think Brentford have strengthened. I think they did well last year, and they've got a really good manager. So I think they might be okay this year, and I think the fixtures are decent enough. You could look to go for Toney. If you were in like a 4-3-3 or a 3-4-3, there's always that question of whether it's Toney or Cancelo, Toney or Robertson, and then it gets a little bit more difficult because the defenders are probably slightly better. But if you are picking a forward and you've got 7 million to spend, I think Toney's a great option. I think those fixtures you can just leave him in and just hope he gets a few penalties along the way, few goals from those pretty decent fixtures. So yeah, I think for 5.5 million, Hugo Lloris has not had much of a mention at all. I'm very keen on having Ederson if I spend this much on my goalkeeper's spot. I've kind of discounted Alisson completely because I'm always going to want 3 of Salah, Trent, Robertson and Diaz. You could make the same case for Man City, right? A lot of people are going to look at Cancelo. A lot of people, even if they don't start with him, will want to leave their options open for Haaland. And then there is like Diaz in defence. There's Grealish possibly at 7 million who could be options. So you could make a case to also not lock off that third Man City spot by having Ederson. Obviously, you can make a transfer, but I'm telling you now, nobody ever wants to make goalkeeper transfers. The thing with Lloris, I'm not sure he's necessarily worth the 5.5. I know he did really well last year, but if I wasn't going for Ederson or Alisson, I feel like I would just spend less money on that goalkeeper spot. One thing that puts me off is you can get the likes of Dyer and Romero for 0.5 million less. Now, obviously, then it all comes down to combos, right? Do you have a slot for a Spurs Spurs defender. If not, maybe it's worth covering off for Lloris. But when I pick my goalkeeper, right, because I've talked a lot about how an early wildcard might happen, but if I'm honest, I don't know when I'm going to wildcard yet. I like leaving my options open, and if I need it, I use it, and if I don't, I just leave it a bit longer. So again, if we look at the kind of rest of the fixtures, right, so these are Spurs fixtures. So game week 6 is Fulham, which we just saw, which is good. But then they got Man City, tough. Then they got Leicester, who could score against them as well. And Arsenal's not that great either. So when it comes to goalkeeper, I like to think a little bit longer term. Like, what if I don't wildcard by game week 5 or 6? Am I still going to be happy having them in this long? And I just don't think for these 3 fixtures in particular, I would be that happy. They have got some really good ones. Wolves, Forest and Fulham are all decent, but Chelsea and West Ham are not great. So I just don't think I would spend the money on Hugo Lloris. I'm not against a 5.5 million keeper, but for me, Ederson is the one, and you just choose to not have that third outfield Man City player. I think if I was going to cover Spurs, I'd probably get one of their defenders for a little bit less money, and even if I didn't get them, I'd probably just spend a little bit less on the goalkeeper position. Let me know if you think differently, though, in the comments below. Am I overlooking Lloris for the wrong reasons? Is he worth that 5.5? So there we go. There's another bunch of players that apparently I've been missing out on. At least that's what you've been saying in the comments. Let me know what you think about what I've said. Do you disagree or agree with any of these players? Are any of them already in your squad? And are there any other players that I'm missing out on? Surely at this point I've covered most of them. Again, leave me a comment below and I'll try and get back to as many as possible. If you enjoyed that video, please do give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here as well. We are not very far from the deadline now for game week 1. It's obviously on Friday. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the videos. There is a hell of a lot of content to come this week, so I'm really looking forward to it. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow for another video.